Hello and welcome everyone to yet another Onslaught University stream. This will also be the last Onslaught University stream during this captain's event. Today we will be talking about the topic how we can carry without mechanics but can still manage to succeed in our gameplay. This will be presented to you today by Lonk. Hey.
Hello, my name's Lonk. I'm a pretty long-standing member of the community, and I think this is um it's a really weird topic for me because I came into the community, developing like a 30-page bill hook guide going into all the deep mechanics of how to get green circles on Witch Hunter Captain. And now I feel like I'm at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where I feel like green circles don't matter at all, and your decision making is the most important thing. And so I think this journey for me was important because it made me realize that there's a lot that you can do that's more important than, just farming damage. And
Awesome.
so as a
Uh,
player who once came from the depths of like focused on farming damage every single game, I think that perspective is I get it and I understand. And so hopefully what I have to say today will help people make that transition, or if you feel like you don't have mechanics, I think this will be a good one for you. Um,
Awesome. Thanks for that quick introduction. Just to get everyone else up to speed, what is going on currently? Because we have a captain's event that is going on. Just a quick explanation what is that. We have a event currently that goes on for 2 weeks. This event is also the one that Long just mentioned. So you have essentially 2 weeks in which you will practice those modded difficulties in Vermintide 2. You will be paired with a coach who is usually a long-standing member of the community, such as Lonk himself, and will practice these difficulties, try to get into the habit of it, what the technical difficulties on this are exactly, and how you manage them, and then you can slowly get to the final event, which will be on Saturday and Sunday this week. So keep an eye out for that as well. There will be 2 streams there covering the final event of those teams that have been playing for 2 weeks now. So keep your eyes out for that. And without further ado, I think we can get started right into the topic, right?
all right, sounds good. Yeah, thanks for the intro, and also just a shout out to the community and everyone running this event, because not a lot of communities do this kind of thing where we get the community together to teach new players, to get excitement, brewing about the game, and to help people really ease into the hard difficulties of the modded realm, and to also get to know people and get to know key figures and get to know what it's like to do an LFG and feel like you now have a grasp on the strategies. And so I think we're a very special community and we should be very happy and proud of ourselves for that. We should recognize that this is not the norm. And so I think the Onslaught series is just, Captain series in particular, it's just something that's really, really wonderful. And I'm very appreciative. And I'm honored to be able to give a presentation today. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the topic is how to carry without mechanics. And I think the goal here is I want to take a step back from a lot of the other presentations that have been given so far. um we've learned about like how to stand on the forbidden pixels to get your teammates to spawn in the perfect spot. We've learned how to abuse the slot system in the game in order to make sure that enemies are attacking you in only the most scientifically correct ways at a given time. And you learned about all the triggers in the maps, and you've learned how to play multiple maps, all these random spots that are close to cheese spots but maybe not quite so. And I think I kind of want to take a step back and start addressing some of the street smarts of this game. Because all that knowledge is wonderful and it's great for introducing you to the modded realm. But now is the point where you have to use that knowledge to gain something. And having all that knowledge won't help you if you end up dying, right? And so, what I want to emphasize is that Vermintide is a contextual game. You're every single moment in time, you're given a new puzzle to solve. And that puzzle is something that you can solve with your team's resources and your team's abilities. And it requires a contextual solution. And so shoehorning yourself into, say, forcing yourself to repeat the same strategies every single map won't necessarily be the highest win. And so problem solving and playing contextually is really important if you're seeking to carry without mechanics. And this presentation is really for you. If you have 4,000 hours on Counter Strike and you're stuck in silver, then this is for you, because Vermintide is not a mechanically demanding game, or at least not on most characters. And green circles don't matter, and this is something that we hear time and time again. On official realm, it's kind of like a bell curve meme where initially people are like, "Oh, green circles don't matter," and then at like the middle of the bell curve, people are like, "Well, actually, it's a pretty good heuristic to indicate how well you're performing." And then at the top of the bell curve, I think a lot of top players are like, "Nah, green circles don't matter." And a way you can think about this, if you're unconvinced, is if you lose a run and you have all the green circles that you feel are relevant to indicate that you played well, you did the best at a losing strategy. Like, say, simply put, right? So, like, you might have, that just wasn't the correct strategy to win the game. The correct strategy to win the game might have involved you doing less damage or more or the same amount. You don't really know because the strategy that you employed was the one that didn't win. And so I kind of want to emphasize this because I think there's a huge amount of power to just using your brain in this game and developing good street smarts. And so I want to highlight the ways that you can enable good team play in this presentation that don't require like you being able to, headshot 100, storm vermin back to back with, like piercing shot or something. With that, I'm going to get into section 1 here. And by the way, the format of this presentation, I will, sort of indicate when questions are fine. It's usually going to be after a slide or after a couple of slides. I'll say, all right, are there any questions? So if you have questions, hold on to them, but feel free to ask. I really am happy for this to be a two-way street. So section 1, the edge case. So in order to understand how to carry games that feel unwinnable or difficult, we need a framework for analyzing the game, right? Because if you have no framework for analyzing the game, we not only can't really talk about strategies in sort of a holistic way, but we also just, you're essentially just playing purely off of intuition. And if your intuition's good enough already to win all your games, then, you don't need to be here. So I'm going to define something here called an edge case. And this is a terminology that comes from board games. But I really think there is huge similarity between a lot of cooperative board games and Vermintide. An edge case is the idea that there's an event or an outcome that is extremely low likelihood to occur, but can have large effects in your game. So if you're ever saying something like, we win 99% of the time here, but if we get that one terrible patrol trigger in the middle of Hail Scourge that loops, then we lose. That's an edge case, right? That's something that's unlikely to happen, but has massive impacts on the viability of your run. And this term, again, comes from board and card games, particularly cooperative ones. I have an image here on the left of a game called Spirit Island that I actually think is remarkably similar to Vermintide. It's a game that you have usually around 4-ish players who are all playing their own characters and their own builds in order to defeat an onslaught of enemies in a turn-based fashion, and they use their abilities to do so. I mean, to me, that kind of sounds like a turn-based Vermintide. Yeah, it has to do with invaders invading an island and your spirits instead. And a lot of development from that game, I think, is really helpful for characterizing how to think about Vermintide. Because again, I think you should be able to pause the game at any point in Vermintide and determine that it's a puzzle, right? When a Packmaster spawns while a boss is coming and there's a horde coming in, that's a puzzle, right? And your team has to address that puzzle with the tools that it has. It's just that Vermintide doesn't give you a lot of time to think about that puzzle. And there's also like a slightly mechanical element to being able to execute it. So now that we understand what an edge case is, I just want to list off some like very common things that often happen. You are doing just fine until your backliner randomly gets assassined right when the blade passes, or you get that super tough looping patrol I talked about, or everything seems okay, and then the boss randomly swaps aggro and downs a player, or maybe two, right? Packmaster spawns when you have any ults or bombs or anything available, And everything here on this list, I'm sure you can read these things, fall into the category of edge cases. But notice that edge cases are not just things that the game presents to you. They're sometimes things that the players present to you, right? Whether you or your teammate maybe say feeds or just downs another teammate for no reason. This can happen in an inopportune time, and that's an edge case, right? And so Vermintide's not only a game about optimizing, what you think your team is capable of in the face of the Skaven onslaught, but also optimizing like the social aspect of how to work with other people, and the fact that people are fallible, that they can make mistakes, and that these mistakes can have big impacts. So I'm going to do one more slide here, and then I'll open up some questions before we go on to the next section. But what do edge cases teach us? And I think this is the biggest mindset shift that you want to have if you're going to dive into higher difficulty content and Vermin. There's often this mantra that playing to win is the best thing to do in almost any game. And the idea of playing to win is really harnessing the idea that you should always be thinking about your outs and playing to your outs. And as someone who came from a competitive card game background, I certainly agree with this. You should be playing to your outs whenever you can. But there is sort of a way that this advice often gets ingested the wrong way. And I think it's the idea that if you're always in this mindset of playing to your outs, you're not necessarily considering the fact that there might be edge cases that are actually coverable. Because when you say play to your outs, what you're really saying is that I cannot cover a certain edge case, and therefore I must ignore it and just do the best I can to cover the remaining edge case, right? But the thing is with Vermintide and with, like that board game Spirit Island and stuff, more edge cases are actually coverable than you might think. And so playing to not lose should be your default strategy. The idea that we should actively try to seek out as many edge cases as we can. And if we can actively eliminate all these edge cases, then it may not be the most comfortable run, but we can't lose on paper, right? And often, how does this manifest? This manifests in the form of very disciplined play. So, for instance, you might have a team that wants to push forward into an area that 99% of the time is safe, but has the potential to have really tough ambience, and you can get stuck there, right? It might be correct to just pull those ambience and come back. And even though you've already fought like 2 hordes here and you're sick of this area and you just want to move on, the correct thing to do in theory is really just to play very safe and very long and very disciplined. And so if your goal is to win games, your primary goal should be to have fun. But if your other goal is to win games, do well in a tournament, or just have a higher win rate when you're LFGing with players, this is a mindset shift that I think a lot of players might need to make. So yeah, I have one more thing here, and then we're at the end of the session. So one question you might ask me is, okay, there's so many edge cases in this game. How could I possibly predict everything, especially if I don't have experience? And this is something that you can train. So here's your flowchart. At a given time in the horde, or between hordes, right? Anytime that you're not actively feeling safe, you should be trying to create the space that you need as a team to feel safe. But once you feel safe, whether it's just that the horde isn't that threatening, or you're walking between hordes, or whatever, all of that is time. It's a valuable time that's ticking. And during that time, you can be predicting what could go wrong. So, for instance, you might be pushing into, say, a tough area in Horn of Magnus after those first stairs. And you know that the respawns in that area are terrible. You also know there's a lot of triggers there. And so you might be thinking, okay, with our comp, what do we need to do? Should we get the boss trigger, say, at the next trigger, and then an ambush comes or something like that? Predicting the things that can go wrong and have a plan ready in your mind. So as soon as that happens, in voice chat, you're the one who says what the plan is, and the team can execute that. And also to make sure that you have the proper resources and abilities available to actually execute that plan. So, for instance, if the goal is to melt the boss with Bounty Hunter or something, and Bounty Hunter is waiting 35 seconds at ult, don't walk into the trigger then. Like, if that's your plan, then don't throw, right? And this is sort of, again, the introductory section. It's section 1. I'm going to go into so much more detail about actual strategies you can use. But right now, we're just developing that framework for how to think about the game in a way that's a bit more like a board game and a bit more analyzable and chewable, when you're trying to eliminate mechanics from the game. So before I go on to section 2, are there any questions so far? I'll just give like 10 seconds or so. And certainly, Janoti, if you could help me with like making sure if there's any questions in the Twitch chat, if those could be communicated, that'd be wonderful
Currently,
as
I
well.
do not see any.
Okay. Well, if it's all cricket noises, then I'll get on to role enable. Here's where I think the presentation starts getting a bit more exciting. So, role enable. Obviously, Vermintide is a game of rules, right? You often have, say, a front line and a back line. You can also have what I tend to call midline, or characters that just defy all positioning metrics altogether, like Shade, who really honestly can do whatever they want as long as they're not actively screwing their team. And um, understanding your own role cannot be complete without understanding other rules, and also cannot be complete without understanding exactly what every role is trying to do at a given point in time. And so I have a little cartoon here where I say, the Waystalker, wait, I can't shoot those specials up there. Also, I'm addicted to shooting Storm Vermin instead. Barton's like, frontlining is easy. Time to press W. These are little cartoons and they seem ridiculous, but this happens all the time, even with very good players. Like, you'll be playing in a lobby with Dutch players, and they just, like, are creating too much space, walk forward, cause a stupid special angle, and the back line is, like, shooting Storm Vermin to farm green circles. This happens. These are players that have, like, 4,000 hours on the game each, and they're making an actively dumb decision. And so if your goal is to be disciplined, you shouldn't be doing these kinds of things. And so I have, example of the based foot knight here on the right. I have 3k hours playing backline, and therefore my front lining is correct and enables my teammate. And what I want to do is I want to go into game for a second. And I want to contextualize a spot that is a very easy hold spot in a kind of way that maybe hasn't contextualized. So I'm just going to swap my screen over. Give me a second here. Okay. Can I get confirmation this is live here in Hunger and Dark?
Yes.
Yeah, works
Okay.
fine.
Excellent. So this is like a very common hold spot in Hunger, right? So for context, you come from there in the map, you come into this room, there's a drop down right there, there's a trigger at the end of this room, there's triggers down the hall, you generally don't hold down there and the enemies climb up. So it's pretty early in the map, right? And if you get a board here, usually what teams do is they'll hold this little box. There's often little items, there's little geometry you can jump on if you need to. Not much, but there's something. And the nice thing about this is, the Horde really just comes from all directions and funnels here. And I think a lot of players, when they learn hold spots like this, it makes sense to them, right? It feels good when you hold a hold spot. But the thing is that these hold spots have been optimized over years, right? Players have realized through trial and error what hold spots work and what hold spots don't. And so I'm going to cast this hold spot not in the light of as simple as the enemies all come into one direction, but understanding what does it actually mean to hold this hold spot with all the rules in mind. So for starters, I think you can always work backwards from special angles. So where are the special angles here, right? You have a special angle down there because enemies can climb up over that ledge. You might have a special angle over here because they'll walk behind that pillar and then appear here. And you have a special angle on the right. It's a very simple hold spot, and I've chosen it because it's a kind of simple hold spot. It's not too complicated. These three special angles are really your primary threats, in addition to maintaining space here with the Horde. Now, that means that as a backline, though, right, if I'm, say, holding back here, I can cover this special angle really easily. And I can kind of cover this special angle if I start peeking up. But notice that I don't innately have access to this special angle. So often what will go wrong is you'll have like a front line who's like trying to make space, they peek this angle, the back line isn't necessarily able to make it over, and they can't cover that angle. So you've introduced an edge case as a front line, and you're kind of actively throwing, right? But as a backline, right, you understand, okay, I need to have access to this angle. So you need to be able to stand here at some given moment in time, which means as a front line, you can't let enemies get beyond this line, right? Because once enemies get beyond this line, then your backline can't function. So the correct thing to do is to kind of be holding this line, and you can push up when there's no specials, and you can give up space as needed. But as a front line, for instance, that if, say, you give up a little bit of space to here, you need to put in extra effort to regain that space immediately. Because as soon as a gas rat spawns there, that's a potential edge case. Because if that gas can throw, this is a tight area and that can nuke your team. Similarly as backline, right? If you see your front line making space for you, you need to be able to stand here and actually cover this angle, in addition to that angle and that angle. And so this is the machinery, right? Where like the back line can't function without the front line, and the front line can't really function without the back line. And they're enabling each other through a proper understanding. And so like this helps you perform better because as a backline, right? Let's say you're losing space here. You have a couple options, right? But you should immediately alarm bells should be going off in your head like, oh crap, I can't cover that right special angle. I mean, maybe you can through the boards of wood, but it's not consistent. And so what do? You communicate to your front line first if they can recover space. If they can't, then you might be able to help them recover space. Maybe you temporarily become a front line, help them make that space so that you can now cover this. Or maybe you try and identify what is the problem where they're actually losing space. Is it like there's 2 storm vermin that are doing weird running attacks? Well, as a backline, you can kill those storm vermin and then immediately make that space. And similarly, if you're a front line, right, and your backline is struggling, try to identify why they're struggling. Is it because this spot isn't actually free? Maybe you thought you were frontlining super well, but there's like a storm vermin that's just been hanging out here the whole time, so your backliner can't stand there. Or maybe like like they're actually unaware that they need to cover this angle. And so this is either something that you can call out or you can try to shoot it yourself. But we'll talk about why role swapping can be kind of bad sometimes in a sec. But in other words, I think understanding the depths of the roles in this kind of hold spot makes it also clear sort of why this hold spot is so good. And it's because you have the ability to problem solve on both roles here, right? Like if we were, say, holding here, which is obviously a terrible hold spot because the Horde's coming from 2 angles. But even if the Horde were just coming from 1 angle, there's not immediate options for the front line or back line in order to problem solve. There's just kind of an inherently bad hold spot. And certainly up here, when the enemies are climbing up and teams move too far up, you actually have a little bit less problem solving power as well, because you can get really bad special angles from there. You can get bad special angles from there. If your team's really far up, your backline might not be able to stand here, might not be safe because the enemies are climbing up in here. And they also have to watch this angle and then 180 degrees behind them and keep checking for a flanking horde. I mean, that's just it's not a spot that you can problem solve as well, and in fact is a spot that opens up more edge cases. And I can contextualize quite a lot of the spots in the map in this way, and the more complicated the spot, the more complicated it gets. One of the common ones that I'm not going to switch maps right now, but I'll mention it, is that first hold spot on Bell in the lower area, right where that first respawn is. Teams often hold the back corner by some crates. And it's a very simple hold spot, and it feels nice because the enemies all come to one place. But understanding exactly how that hold spot functions is actually really critical. Because there you have the backup plan of being able to jump over the boxes and kite. Your backline has full access to create space if needed. Like they can drop down and create space. They can jump up on the boxes and shoot things that are in front. They can see every single special angle. The front line isn't necessarily peeking any new special angles. The rotates are possible. You can also hold up on the stairs to the right and then rotate back to that spot if you want additional safety, like an additional layer of plan B. And so I guess I'm nerding out a little bit about these spots, and I'm probably like highlighting things that you kind of already know, but like stating the obvious here, I think is important because these things, I see them happen all the time that players don't necessarily understand what their role was when they were standing on the spot and they create a problem. Like even very experienced players with thousands of hours sort of forget the very basics of what their role was supposed to be and what their teammates' role was supposed to be and how to problem solve that. You know what I mean? So I'm going to go back to the slideshow real quick. And so that's the first step of carrying without mechanics is you need to understand the roles in your team, all of the roles in your team, and what everyone is supposed to be doing. So that was the in-game demonstration time. Because if you don't understand what everyone's supposed to be doing, then you can run into various problems. One problem that you might run into is something called role swapping. So this is where often, due to a lack of trust, and during this section, if people want to ask questions really anytime, that's fine. Often due to a lack of trust, you might have a front line that wants to shoot a special because they notice that their backline isn't killing specials quite as quickly enough. this is not necessarily, it can be the right solution. Excuse me, sorry. Can be the right solution if you notice that you don't really have much on you, you are more free right now, you're not exchanging any space or anything like that in order to shoot it. But if you're just shooting it out of fear, you're actually making the problem worse. Because remember, that backline is relying on you to make space. So remember that spot and hunger, right? So if you try to like keep peeking that right side and shoot specials, and there's like multiple specials there and you can only kill one at a time, every time you shoot, you have to give up space because you lose the ability to block. Remember Chance's and Firewatch's presentation, from a couple weeks or last week, right? They highlight how important it is to be able to block as a front line to maintain control space. If you are not able to block, you will have to give up some space at some point. And certainly if you're shooting those specials, you're losing space. If you lose that space on that spot and hunger, your backline's now incapable of doing it. So you may have thought they were incapable before, but now you're solidifying that they actually cannot do anything to solve that problem because you've decided that you must take it over as someone who has like a 3-second reload on handgun or something. And this is a very common way that teams throw. And it can also be a source of toxicity, because then at the end of the game, the toxic mercenary might be like, oh, I have the green circle on specials. Clearly you shouldn't play backline. But really they did nothing to enable their backline during that whole. And there's other ways to deal with this problem. But like ideally, at a base level, we can easily understand why it's inefficient to have a Merc Ruber be backlining and why it's inefficient for a Waystalker with enhanced power on Sword and Dagger to be trying to clear Horde, So that's one thing that I want to point out. This happens all the time with less experienced teams, with more experienced teams, and I want to highlight that teams operate on trust, and even if you're in a lobby of players you've never played with before, there has to be an idea of trust in order for this to function. It's much better to fix why is the backline not able to, say, snipe the specials and try and solve the actual problem that's creating that, rather than treating the symptoms, if that makes sense. And so how do you correct for, like, say, role inadequacies, I'll call them. So one thing you can always do is you can check in with other roles verbally in a nice way and see how people are feeling in between hordes. And you can do this before anything goes wrong. After the first horde, you just be like, do people like the comp? You just make some chatter. And if someone doesn't like something, they're going to say it. They're going to say it probably pretty early. They're going to be like, hey, I like it, but it feels a little unsafe for me right now. I feel like I would have a lot of pressure. Well, it's good to know that now, rather than like 20 minutes in when they actually do have a lot of pressure and they end up dying for it. Because now it's something that's on your radar. So as the person who's trying to carry without mechanics, you're now intaking that information, internalizing it as a potential way that things can go wrong. We've always talked about, edge cases being both from the game and from players. This is a potential like player game, both edge case, right? And another thing you can do, and this is a huge tactic, this is a huge secret, is you can experiment during easy waves. What happens if you focus certain enemies? What happens if you make a little bit more space? What happens if you give up a little bit of space? During times when kind of nothing can go wrong, it's a great time to kind of feel out your team, feel out your players, and see what's going on. And actually, I do this in very high-level games, playing with some of the best players in NA. I am aware that certain players play better when I do things that are seemingly weird to me. They don't necessarily bloat my own stats or feel like the thing I should be doing, but I've just noticed through experimentation that there's certain situations that make other people more comfortable, and I'm willing to accommodate that because I want my teammates to be comfortable and feel effective. And this only happens through experimentation. And if you maybe can't keep track of this during the game, start recording your games. Gosh darn it. You need to be recording your games if you really want to get better. Watch over your VODs. Watch over what went wrong, what went well. Because during this time, you'll be able to see a lot of this stuff I'm talking about. And so, for instance, this repeater bounty hunter might be like, normally bounty hunter's job is mostly to be killing specials and, elites as much as possible with repeater. But maybe they're not as much struggling with, peeking bad special angles, and that Gaslight doesn't need to die immediately, but rather they're dying to Maulers instead. You can make the simple change to prioritize Maulers. there is a forbidden approach here, and I call it forbidden because it's kind of toxic. But there is the idea as well that if someone doesn't really communicate very well, like they don't really talk or don't really listen, and they also and this happens because you just get players who just like lock in and just do whatever they want. Um, and they also like don't necessarily respond to you playing differently because they're like very focused on their own thing. One thing you can do is, some people might laugh at me for this, but I've done this sometimes and it's been effective. So you can kind of control the information a little bit. So, for instance, if your backline is off Nowhereville doing what they should not be doing, you can be like, huh, I think I heard a blight over there. And almost every backliner will position correctly once you say that you think you hear a blight, because they're very concerned with getting their special green circle. And you can be like, oh, shoot, I guess I just heard something. And this is actually, it's very cursed, and you shouldn't be your first line of defense. This should be like your 8th line of defense. But sometimes it's the right way to do it in a way that's socially acceptable, where you're not just like, getting frustrated with teammates or something like that. So, something to keep in mind. Problem solving this game is about the social aspect just as much as it is about fighting. But there's better ways to do it, and they often involve using your own abilities. So a character I really like to highlight is Ironbreaker. Ironbreaker is a great character for people who often feel uncomfortable with their mechanics, because Ironbreaker is a very safe character, right? They have a lot of safety built into their kit, and they have a lot of like very massively impactful abilities that are on long cooldown, such as Booming Taunt or Trollhammer Shot that takes forever to reload, right? But they have immediate and huge impact when you use them. So here's like the most basic example. If you think that there's an edge case coming about because your team is holding a spot that's not good and you just happen to be stuck there, and hordes are coming from 2 different sides, one thing you can do is you can taunt one of the waves, right, proactively before something goes wrong, and hold that wave while your team finishes the other wave and they can come back to it. Or you can pull the waves into each other, not walking through teammates and communicating that you're doing so you don't cause like a ton of running attacks or something, so that you actually physically group up the horde. Like you're doing the linearization that your team was supposed to do, but you're just doing it with your ability. And it uses a resource, but like you often have abilities that are able to shape the horde in these kinds of ways. There's other ways you can do this. Like on Zealot, you can proactively proc your passive if, say, you're in a situation where like you are not allowed to lose space. Like you have to be maintaining the space or else there's so many bad things that can happen. So maybe you just stand there and just like sit there and just maintain the space. And like you don't care if you proc your passive. You use that survivability during that time to do extra damage, encourage your team to do extra damage, and you're leveraging your passive as a resource to actually like get DPS out of that situation, because a character standing there who's unkillable is the best front line in the world. Like I'll tell you right now, if you've ever tried like using invincible bots or something like that, there's mods for this, and just throw them into a server, they are the best front lines ever, because they can't die and they occupy a ton of slots. So there's ways to do this on other characters that are all specific to whatever character it is that you like the best. With Mercenary, right, if you are running the DR Vault, you can use this proactively and not even for temp HP to just prevent people from dying in situations where maybe they're dying normally. So maybe like you've noticed that your team really struggles with just dodging SV overheads for some reason. Well, that's not something that you're going to be able to like go over to their house and like, press shift for them so that they can dodge the overhead, right? Instead, you have to find a way to protect them. And one way to protect them that might be a little silly is to just give them the DR they need to survive the overhead. And then they get their ult back from tanking the overhead and use their ult to clear the wave. Sometimes this has been correct. When I've been playing with like some teams that for some reason struggle with this, I just like run Merc, run the DR, and we start clearing every wave easy peasy. This is problem solving. And I can give a lot of specific examples and I can give you a lot of framework, but at the end of the day, your own creativity and knowledge about the game is going to enable you to find this solution that fits with your group, your players, and your team and your resources. And if you want to carry without mechanics, then you need to have skill points in your ability to creatively problem solve, right? What I'm trying to do with this presentation is motivate you that there are a lot of tools to creatively problem solve in this game. There are a surprising number. On every single character, there's things you can do. And a lot of it has to do with understanding what's going on. And this is a segue into my next section here. So before I start though, any questions so far? Any challenges? Any back and forths?
What is the witch hunter captain example
Oh, good question.
on the
I
slide
actually
above?
think this is a great question. And as you know, I'm a huge Witch Hunter nerd, so I absolutely love thinking about what Witch Hunter can do. I think Witch Hunter actually has some of the best problem-solving potential of almost every character, almost any character. Part of the reason for that is that they're extremely versatile, right? They can snipe specials, they can frontline, they can DPS, they're kind of the jack of all trades. And part of that as well just manifests in like their weapon choices. Like what the rapier can do and what the billhook can do in certain situations is massive. So here's an example for like a classic Witch Hunter Captain billhook, right? So billhook has this ridiculous attack, the alt fire, that will just stagger almost anything out of an attack, right? I mean, you can't stagger monsters, but you can stagger pretty much everything else. You can even stagger packmasters as they're hooking your teammates. And because it has quite a lot of cleave, like more cleave than you expect, you don't really need to aim it that much in order to actually stop a lot of these problems. And so let's say your team is struggling with running attacks, which is obviously kind of an individual skill problem, because if you have good movement and you have good frontline principles, there shouldn't be a lot of running attacks. But let's say there are, for some reason. I might adjust as Witch Hunter to do a little bit less damage, use a little bit less stamina, and make sure I have that stamina ready for when those edge cases come out. So as soon as I see that first smaller running attack, I ult fire it immediately so that it doesn't get to complete, and then I like literally walk forward and block the next one. So that uses a lot of stamina, but I blocked two potential problems from like nuking my teammates. Also during this time, you have the opportunity to just crit one of them, right? If you're aiming for the head, which will immediately kill that enemy. Sometimes it's better to just like raw DPS. Your team can already hold the front line really well. And as my like Witch Hunter Captain guide makes very clear, there's a whole spectrum between playing very safe and playing like an absolute green circle greed lord, right? And identifying where on the slider that you need to be to solve whatever problem it is really key. So let's say your team is able to hold that space into like a huge Mauler wave. There's not really a lot of running attacks, but for some reason we're just killing Maulers really slowly. Well, Witch Hunter Captain has the best tools to do that, and that's just by critting them, right? And I have a whole list of Mauler combos you can investigate if you want more detail. Also, your ultimate is a shout ultimate and a crit and damage ultimate all in one on low cooldown. So sometimes if I'm noticing that we need shouts like a lot more than I would normally deem necessary, I might actively hit trade on Witch Hunter just to make sure I have my ult up at key times. And I will also, this bleeds into the next section a bit, I'll be constantly looking at what are the other shouts and staggers on my team and making sure that one of them is available at some given time. What I want to avoid is having all of them on cooldown at some given time, because that's how you wipe this. You don't have like the OP abilities in this game, like the overpowered hero abilities to solve that problem. Maybe a boss comes in, Witch Hunter Captain can certainly choose to take that boss, but they can also assign the boss to someone else and do great Horde DPS. They can help shoot that edge case Blightstormer. There's all sorts of things that are always going to be contextual, and the correct choice is not to do all of these things. It's to do the set of things that's correct for your game. And the better you are at Witch Hunter, and the better you are at this idea of carrying without mechanics, the quicker you will identify what is necessary for your lobby to succeed. So I encourage Witch Hunter Captain players to maybe break out of the mold of just like mindlessly push attack lighting. And maybe while you're mindlessly push attack lighting, think about the game and try and identify what in your kit do you need available, in order to solve problems. So I'm actually really glad you asked about Witch Hunter, because I obviously adore Witch Hunter, and I think there's so many cool problem solving potentials that you can. And actually, in playing with some of the top teams, sometimes I actually purposely lower my damage on Witch Hunter just so that I can like frontline better, because I noticed that, say, on our team, GK can kill the special like elites just faster than me for whatever reason. And just staggering everything for him means that he can Xe sword those elites, like instantly, you know? Or, maybe we have like a halberd merc or something, and the player is like she's trying to take on a similar role or something like that, you know? Regardless, like it's just something that I will try to evaluate based on the like set of players, what they're able to do and everything. So, great question. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Also, of course.
Currently, I don't see anything else in the Twitch chat, but
Okay.
I don't know if anyone here has any more questions.
No, we can move on to the next section for now.
All right.
Don't be shy with your questions, though. So the next step, I talked about information. This is a skill. Understanding information in this game is a skill that you will absolutely need to develop if you want to carry the game without mechanics, or even just become a very good player in general. So what is information? Defined for this presentation, it's the combination of instantaneous data on your teammates and current threats, in addition to the projected data for the following seconds. In a board game, the information is all open and known. You see exactly what land recently explored by the invaders and what's going to build and what you need to do. It's like all laid out in cards. In Vermintide, there is an extra layer because there's a lot going on and things are constantly moving and shifting. And so being able to process what's going on is legitimately a skill. To practice this skill with your team, what I recommend, and this is something my players are familiar with this because I've done this sometimes with my players or asked them to, is you should be able to pause the game at any moment and close your eyes and reconstruct the entire game state. You should be able to say where the Horde is, where the specials are, where your teammates are, who's attacking what abilities are on cooldown, what abilities aren't on cooldown, etc., etc. If you're not tracking this information, then you're not informed enough to make the problem-solving decisions that I've been describing on previous slides. And, one example, like specific example of like tracking information is actually like enemy attacks. Like one thing I notice with players that struggle with kite events, say Righteous Stand or Into the Nest End event, things like that, is they often say, I can't keep up with the kite because I feel like I'm blocking too much. And part of the reason I'm blocking a lot is because I don't really know when the attacks are coming. I just know there's a lot of attacks. But you'll notice that really good players are almost barely blocking during these kinds of things. They are blocking sometimes, but they're blocking at the exact moments they need to block and at no other points. And they're gaining all this advantage, right, of being able during that time to move tech, to damage, to jump, to do whatever, right, to just move faster. They're gaining all this advantage over you through their experience simply by being able to process the information better, because they know what attacks are coming when, and they can look at that blob of enemies and determine at what rhythms the attacks are coming. And this is a skill that's very hard to it's very hard to develop and takes a lot of time, and it might just develop naturally for you over time. But I really encourage players to just try the idea of like maybe loading into a map and trying to kite the Righteous Stand event yourself, turn off specials, and turn on no death or whatever so you can't die, and just try to pay attention to all the attacks that are in front of you. That's like the basic level of trying to understand information. And then try to mix in other things. Where are the specials? Where are your teammates? What have they done? What are people communicating? And add these things in one layer at a time. So maybe one game, you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to try and do my best to focus on tracking ultimates this game. And the next game, you're like, okay, I'm going to do my best to try and focus on tracking enemy attack patterns this game. Iteratively build up these things, because the advantage you get from information is insane, because you identify time that is free, time that is safe for you to work toward whatever solution you're imagining. I also want to make just a slight difference here between what I want to call personal info and remote info. Personal info is the stuff that you are keeping track of in your brain. Remote info is the stuff that your teammates are keeping track of, which ideally should overlap a lot with what you're keeping track of. But there might be slight differences. let's say you're a frontline. You might be noticing a little bit more, say, like the Skaven trash that are trying to path around you right now, because that's kind of your goals to try and make sure things aren't pathing around you, you're creating space. As a backline, you might notice a little bit more that some of the specials are taking a really long time to path to you, and that you don't really need to shoot anything right now or something like that, because it's within your role, it's what you're actively focused on. But overall, things about the larger game state, very good teams, everyone is on the same page. And when everyone's on the same page, really what that means is that they have access to the same information. And so what you need to do, sorry, before I get into what you need to do, I I kind of skipped a slide here, but I want to kind of highlight an example of how information sharing in a team might work. So the most simple example is like you get a packmaster in the Horde. And what I would hope for like teams that are newer and need to communicate more is the idea that every stage of solving the packmaster puzzle is executed out loud. So here's my example. Someone's like, hey, there's a pack behind the cart to the right. What do we have for pack? We have Trollhammer. Okay, I have Alt 2, but use Trollhammer first. So here we've identified what the primary solution is, what the secondary solution is. The pack is close. Dodging, we hear the sound of the Trollhammer shot because it's a newer team and people aren't dodging packs very well. And in more experienced players, this becomes very streamlined, and sometimes people say almost nothing at all. But the key things are often said. And in fact, the most critical line is someone just says, I've got pack. And when someone says, I've got pack, people already can fill in the blanks of like, they are covering it with this ability, and secondary should probably be this, blah, blah, blah. They can fill in all those blanks because everyone has access to this information. Everyone's processing this information. So when does information control go wrong? When do people start failing the exercise of being able to pause the game at any given point and being able to reconstruct the game state? And it's usually when there's just too much information, right? Or there's just a lot going on. So an example might be an Onslaught Plus, you just stumbled into a double boss trigger, and then you got a Horde, and then people have to play separately and are starting to like do their own thing, like Convocation of Decay, mid-event almost. And everyone's focused on their own survival. So in this case, information starts becoming very difficult to track because someone might literally be behind a wall away from you and you can't see what's going on there. You might just be able to see their outline, but at least you can see, if they have their ult, what health they're at, etc. This can create lots of problems. This can cause teams to kite into each other. Rules can fall apart, so maybe the specials fall out of control or space just gets totally lost. Someone dies because they didn't assign the pressure well. Like maybe one person took too much stuff and two people were on an easy problem. Often bosses will just change aggro in this game and you have to be prepared for that. If your team is fighting the boss in the corner and you're near them protecting them, always have a backup plan in your mind for what happens if that boss just decides to leave them, because it will happen in this game. And one thing I'm going to stress later, and I'll come back to this point, is that the team doesn't have to have a good plan. They just need a plan. Is the goal to eliminate one threat and regroup, to survive and win the attrition war? Do two people go here, two people go here? And these things are often to be communicated. And the solution is dependent on what kind of group you're playing with. And ideally, either solution 1 or 2 is. So solution 1 is that not everyone actually needs to know all the information. That it's better to have one person be a little dictatorial in terms of processing the information and assigning a solution. And so if you're that player, you need to be asking questions from your teammates, right? You need to be like, hey, what's on you right now? Or like, hey, where are you going? And like get those answers quickly and get that communication quickly going so that you can better assign tasks and arrange things. Be like, hey, you need to kite to the right. Wait, I can't do that. I'm getting stuck. Okay, I'll make space for you. This is the communication that has to happen fast and efficiently. The other solution is that the team kind of decides a solution all at once. And the information is shared at the very beginning of a new threat, and then the plan is formed quickly together, and you separate and complete that plan. Now, ideally in this case, the plan was formed before the edge case happened. Remember, I was always talking about in previous slides, predicting what can go wrong and being preemptive about problems, because it's always better than being reactive to problems. We don't want the Blight to be able to cast. We want the Blight to be dead before it can cast, because we don't want an edge case. Some teams, everyone plays a very self-sufficient game plan, but communicates information as needed to the team. This is the case where you have kind of like 4 silent players that are just locking in. And some teams operate best this way, where people are doing their own thing and they're communicating as needed. But again, this is something that you'll have to feel out playing with your players. And, I've already talked about the solution for it. It's kind of a last resort. I wouldn't recommend it. But I feel like it's important to mention because it does fall in line with everything I'm talking about. I want to talk about now managing resources because I've already talked about like understanding, what cooldowns your teammates are on, what, pots and bombs have been used, etc. And resource management is something that is often not conducted well and can go wrong in games. So resources are anything that can be consumed. So a pot, a potion, an ult, rumble curse, health, etc. Like anything that can deplete and be gone and potentially irrecoverable is a resource. Now, the point of this is I want to highlight that the point of using a resource is to gain something, and a resource should not be used to gain nothing, or especially to gain comfort, because comfort may not be a solved problem. And every individual resource adds up to the group pool, and this will inform your own resource usage. Because you want to keep track of, say, if you have a stagger ult, you have to make sure what are all the other staggers on the team. Okay, if 3 other staggers in the team have been used and you're the last stagger, then you shouldn't be using your ult just to make a little bit of space here because you want to. Right? You're the last line of edge case protection. You kind of need to wait for another ult to get close to back up. Or if you decide to use your ult, you need to communicate, hey, we have no more shouts right now, so that your team can make the proper adjustment and deal with that problem. And I think ideally you can cycle, and if both players are properly hit trading and doing damage, the cycle will be fast. You don't have to wait too long. But it's important that you have at least one resource available at any given sudden difficulty spike. Because difficulty spikes are not best beaten with mechanics, they're best beaten with brute force abilities. This is why, like when Dutch first came out, Scav RV was super broken. Scavenger RV was very broken because you just got tons of potions and bombs for free. And it turns out that every difficulty spike in the game could just basically be rolled by resource investment. Because again, the items like bombs, potions, shouts, ults, Grom curse, etc. All these things are inherently overpowered. They're just in the game design to be able to just absolutely floor the rats, right? The way that the rats win is by numbers, not by their abilities actually being super threatening on their own. Your abilities are way more powerful. Now, another thing that might be a little bit more nuanced is like managing health. If you see 3 people are on low health, it's not the right time to start hit trading or exchanging your own health. You need to play safer because let's say 2 people go down, right? That person that has 1 health might not be able to res if, say, a gas comes in. Like, you need to be able to make sure that there's at least some resource on your team available to spend in that event of an edge case. So informing how safe or aggressive you can play and how your abilities are used is all part of this resource management. Now, resource management, there's a reason I call it Section 3.5, is because Section 3 is all about information. It all falls under information, tracking information in the game, managing information in the game, right? Okay, I have one more section here, but I'm curious if there are any more questions or things like that, discussion points. I'm happy to interact with anything that anyone brings up.
I don't see any questions in the Twitch chat right now.
I have one. Specifically related to potions and like speed potion and bombs that I find when I want to save them for when shit goes down, but when shit goes down there's not space to use them. Then I drink the speed potion and I take an overhead because I don't block something like that.
So what I would say is, without knowing the exact specifics of what happened, I can't give perfect advice. So I'm only going to give kind of like higher level advice because it's kind of just a rough situation you've given. However, that being said, I think usually that's a sign that you weren't preemptively preventing that situation enough. Like you didn't recognize the problem was coming until it actually was upon you, right? And a lot of the point of this presentation is to preemptively and predictively like avoid problems. You're trying to, again, play to not lose, right? So you're constantly trying to predict what could go wrong and eliminate it. So if you sense like, so for instance, one case that maybe you're referring to, I'll make up an example here, and so I'll put some words in your mouth. You can tell me if they fit. Is like maybe you get a surprise double wave, right? You should be spotting that double wave as it's coming in and drinking that potion while you're still safe, and then clearing that wave immediately as it comes in, right? You don't want to be like, oh no, the double wave is here and we have no space. Time to drink my potion and die, right? Because that's far too late. And this will tie into something that I'm going to get into in the last section about how hesitation is, I think, the number one killer of players in this game. And so I think it's something where there's often more resources than you think to deal with difficulty spikes. And I would almost rather my players, at least, to make the wrong call, that they thought they saw a double wave coming in and drank that strength right away, and then there ended up not being a double wave and they just didn't see it correctly, because that'll get fixed over time, than for them to like not have the instinct to get on top of that. Do you feel like that answers your question, or were you thinking of kind of a different situation that's like harder to counter or something?
I think it is a great answer.
Oh.
I was thinking, so if like we are fighting and there's a patrol in the nearby, I sort of make a mental trap wire and thinking if we pull the patrol, I throw the firebomb.
Mm-hmm.
That just trying to understand, like, that's the double wave. The pulling the patrol is the double wave will screw us over right now. So if that happens, I throw the firebomb.
Yep, exactly. And one thing you want to avoid doing is, unless you absolutely need it to save the situation, is to throw that firebomb while the patrol is still up and you haven't progressed to that next area. You know what I mean? Because it's like, you want to make sure that, like, in your mind, you've assigned like a certain card. I mean, these things are all board games, card games to me. You've assigned a certain card, right, as a response to a certain situation. So if you use it to respond to a different situation and then the edge case occurs, you only have yourself to blame. Or you have to ask yourself, why did I need to use it on that other situation? What else went wrong? See if you can solve that. In the case, though, where let's say you really wanted to save your resources for that pat, but then you ended up having to blow your resources on something. It happens, right? How do you move forward from that? Well, this needs to be communicated. Again, everyone needs to be on the same page with regards to information. What you don't want is for someone to not realize you don't have resources for the patrol now. So now you need to say, hey, we can't take risky strats with this patrol. We have to be very careful and try and get around it because we don't have any protection. Or maybe you think you can still kill it, but you then need to bring it to an area where it's actually killable. You can't just pull it out in the open. You might have to fight multiple more hordes than you want to in order for the situation to go well. But it's a disciplined approach and one that involves the team. And another downside, I know I'm super chatty here, but bear with me. Another downside here is you might say, okay, we're fighting multiple hordes in a tournament setting. We're wasting a lot of tournament time. And yes, you're right. You are wasting a lot of tournament time. But first of all, winning the run wastes less time than losing the run and restarting. And second of all, you will get faster with experience. Runs get faster with experience. Things get more efficient. You waste less time, etc., etc. When you're starting out, I think it's important to start more safe and have the tools to solve these problems, and then let that experience make things more efficient over time. You don't need to, like, when speed is not through rush decision making, it's through like carefully identifying like exactly the free time that the game has given you that a lesser team would not identify as safe or free, because what's safe or free to a good team is a higher bar, right? So hopefully that's like a good answer to your question.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you.
Of course.
I have a few more questions from the Twitch chat right here.
Let's go. All
One
right.
is just following up on the double wave that you mentioned. What exactly is the double wave?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So a double wave, it can sometimes happen in almost any modded difficulty. So first, let me start by defining a wave. So every horde has 3 waves. Now, these waves have actual names in the game files. So there's like a mod called Vermin Trader where you can spawn certain waves, like spawn Chaos Armor Huge Berserker or something, and it spawns a particular horde composition that might have like a lot of armors and armored enemies and berserkers, and it's like a, mostly chaos. And there's all sorts of these types of waves that can come. And the game will often spawn 3 of them. And a lot of what Onslaught Plus, etc. does is it kind of juices up these waves and makes them pretty threatening. Um, a double wave can occur when the threat system of the game is kind of confused, and it basically will send 2 waves at you at the same time. So normally you're fighting 3 waves in a horde, one at a time, and now suddenly you're fighting twice the strength of a wave that you expect at once. They just both came in at the same time. This is a double wave, and it's scary because it's literally double the difficulty on a very short notice. Like you're fighting a horde, and then suddenly a double wave comes in, and you feel that pressure because it's twice the number of enemies, and it's very thick. There's usually lots of elites. So hopefully that's a good definition for double wave and kind of characterizes it in terms of the mods in the game and stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I think so. Another one is you touched on boss aggro switching. Can you please explain how boss aggro works and assigning someone to actively take aggro and isolate it?
That's a good question. And I don't have a complete answer for you because boss aggro is kind of a mystery to me to some degree because you think you understand it and then it seems to operate in a way that you don't understand. But generally, if you say were the one who hit the trigger and you're closest to the boss and you're damaging the boss, you will take aggro. The boss can aggro to you either by proxy or by damage. Now, the type of damage is very important because you can like wail on a boss with melee, and then a Sister of the Thorn just has boss aggro seemingly without trying. Generally, things like bleed and burn, like lingering flames, battle wizard, or Sister of the Thorn bleed, those like refreshing dots are extremely good at ripping aggro from teammates and keeping aggro because you're continuously hitting the boss like with the range. And because also once you have the boss and you bring it to a corner or something, you now also have the proxy aggro. Now, those who understand the mechanics of the game deeper than I do, I would love you to write up a more concrete explanation. I'm sure someone like Royale with Cheese has a guide somewhere or an essay somewhere on how boss aggro works because it's a weird mechanic. But generally, if you're wailing on the boss and you're close to it, you'll maintain aggro, but sometimes it will switch. Another thing I forgot to mention is if you stagger the boss at all, it will probably switch to you. So, like, if you're a Grail Knight and you hit it with your ultimate, it's probably going to switch to you. If you throw a bomb at the boss, it's probably going to switch to you. Battle Wizard ult, probably going to switch to you. Another very key thing I mentioned. Now, assigning players to bosses. Yes, this is a very good concept. So, generally, when a boss in Horde comes in, the kind of textbook solution is that one person takes the boss to a secluded area where they can solo the boss or have it just loop or do something that's not very impactful against the team, while the rest of the team clears up the wave and clears up the specials and protects that person. And how do you know who to assign? The answer is that it doesn't actually matter. I mean, ideally, like there's choices that are better or worse, I guess. So if you have a team of 3 melee characters and 1 backline, probably not good to assign your backline to the boss because the 3 melee characters now have a lot of special pressure to deal with. But at the end of the day, it's something that I'm going to get into, is it's better to just go with a plan quickly than it is to try and do the best possible plan. So if the aggro the boss is just not playing nice with you and it just wants to go on the backliner, you can try to steal it, but if you're losing the horde in order to try and steal it or creating some other problem, then it's not worth it, right? Ideally, though, the player that takes the boss is not necessarily even one that has a ton of boss damage, unless they have a ton of boss damage, like, say, Bounty Hunter with double shot and a pot. It's really just one who can keep the boss away from the team. Because the point is not really to kill the boss, it's to eliminate the threat or remove the threat temporarily. So even someone who just doesn't attack the boss really at all and just kind of dodges and blocks in a corner is doing a perfect job at keeping. Hopefully that answers your question.
I think it does. Yes. Thank you.
Excellent.
That was it from the Twitch chat.
Oh, okay, excellent. So I'm almost done here, actually. There's only 2 more slides. And section 4 is, what do you do when edge cases happen anyways? And I've kind of already answered this, so I'm going to be reiterating myself. But the point is that you don't need a good plan. You just need a plan, and fast. Because the biggest thing that kills teams in this game that I notice as a coach is hesitation. It's when something tricky happens, people don't start communicating at first, and they're like, I don't know what to do. Okay, this is getting really tough now. I'm going to take the boss or something. I don't know. And like during all that time when the boss was running to you, when the Horde was running to you, when nothing was happening, was time where you needed to be using your brain and communicating to come up with a plan. Because you're not hitting anything during that time, right? You're not playing the game, you're waiting. So during that wait time is the time you have to solve the puzzle. Now, it's great if you can come up with the best plan every time. And often the measure of a very good team is the quality and speed they're able to come up with plans. You know, like if they're able to come up with high quality plans quickly, then they're going to be a very good team. But the team that's able to come up with a low quality plan quickly will always beat the team that's able to come up with a high quality plan too late. And this is just something that I've noticed with experience. And so this is also true in a lot of other games, you know, like Overwatch or whatever, where like you don't need necessarily a good plan. Like if someone's making a mistake and your whole team commits on that bad plan, it might be fine. Because if you have 4 people who are determined to make a bad plan work, then you have the teamwork factor to make it work, right? A classic example is like, let's say the plan is to kite in an area that like really sucks to kite and you can get stuck a lot. Well, turns out if you have 4 people wailing on a group of enemies that are currently trapping you, it's way more efficient than having 2 people wailing on it or 1 person wailing on it, right? You know, your DPS might be very high on your character, but it will never match the DPS of 4 players, even moderate DPS, that are focused on a single target. And so if you're all like using your ults, smashing your keyboard in order to get through that spot, you'll probably get through that spot if you're really committed. And so even though it was a terrible plan, it still worked out. Whereas if you didn't have a plan quickly, someone might get stuck there and just not have the DPS to actually execute that plan, you know? And so this is where communication on teams is so important. And it's something that I really emphasize for my players is I always, if I don't hear them talking enough, I'll be like, oh, the boss came in, Horde's coming, what's the plan? And that usually prompts them to be like, okay, here's the plan, this is what we're going to do. And most of the time, it works out. And it's really cool to see as a coach, to see my players deal with a tough situation and often come up with a solution that's maybe not very good, but it worked out. And I think that's the beautiful part of Vermintide, you know? So I think that's kind of the main things that I have to talk about. One thing I can do if people want me to talk more or less, is I can contextualize some of the other hold spots in the game in a more detailed manner. If you have any questions about like particular spots in the game. And also if there's just any questions in general about this, because it's a lot of information. But I think I'll just end by saying that you don't need mechanics to do really well in this game. And we've seen, actually, if you put like 4 of the best players in the world in the same lobby, they don't necessarily win. I've actually seen them kind of wipe a lot. And it's really important that like proper team play, proper analysis, proper role enabling, information control, all these things, right? That's what leads to teams that win. And, you know, for a while, some of the teams that were doing extremely well in our community were not teams that would even say themselves have like the best mechanics in the entire game. They just have very good team play. And I think what I want to emphasize is that good team play is more accessible than you might think. Sure, it helps if you have a group of people who are willing to play with you every single week as like a second job, you know? Like, sure, you're going to get good team play playing with those people all the time. But even if you don't have that luxury, even if you're just a pubber looking to pub around in random, modded lobbies, there's a lot you can do to encourage good team play, and even just a little bit will improve your win rate by, say, 5%. 5% higher win rate is 5% more than zero. And the pub win rate is, generally low. So it's huge, huge margin. So yeah, with that, I just want to encourage players out there, whether they feel like they have a lot of mechanics and want to sort of take a step back and start using their brain more, or if they feel like they don't have strong mechanics and want to be thinking about these things to elevate their game. I think Vermintide's a great game for you because it's really inviting to all types of players. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to talk about for today. So I'm opening it up to questions, comments, discussions that people want to have about specific topics.
Thank you. That was a lot. That was a lot at the same time, but I think it all comes down to information, how you deal with this situation, and how much experience you have in the end as well. Because the more you play the game, the faster you get, right? So all comes down to what you do in the situation.
I was actually talking with Slash Kex, who gave the most recent, Vermintide University lecture, and I was asking him, like, hey, do you feel like there's like random things from this presentation I'm kind of missing? And we were just chatting for a while. And one thing that I noticed Slash said is he was like, oh, like a lot of these things, I don't think I even think about. I think I kind of just do them, but I didn't realize I was doing them. And you're right, that makes sense, And so this kind of speaks to your point that players that are really experienced, they might not even realize they're doing this. But the point of this kind of presentation is that, I'm trying to like connect with players that, are learning the game right now in the Captain series, or maybe just watching and trying to improve as a player, or players that feel like they have a lot of experience, but are maybe like they have to go back to basics for a little bit because there's something wrong with their game. I think these kinds of concepts, putting it into sort of plainer speak and kind of like structuring it more, can be really helpful for a number of people, and that was the goal. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very valid point. And it's also a nice refresher after we had so many mechanically and technically concepts over these other university streams, which were very in depth to like look at the rough outline of the situation and how we just deal with like minor problems that just happen to everyone. Like as you said, these things they don't happen to people that just started the game only. They happen to everyone. They happen to people that have been playing this game for thousands of hours, and they're still doing this each and every time.
Yeah, whenever I see like a 6,000-hour player peeking a special angle and making my backlining harder, I'm just like, oof, I I get it, but also, it's like kind of something that I'm like, I think this is like a choice. This is not a skill.
Right. He knows exactly what he's doing.
Right. I think they're obviously capable. They're just being lazy. Yes. Right.
So yeah, just another quick heads up. If you have any more questions to the topics discussed, if you have anything that you want to add or anything that you want to like see discussed on top of that, feel free to shoot them now. That is really the chance right now. We did talk a lot about how we can give out information, how we should communicate in rough situations, how we can reactively and not reactively react to a situation, so we can like make sure that things don't even escalate, so we can like react to things before they even get out of hand. And then also big topics such as what makes a hold spot even a good hold spot, because everyone knows these spots, but like why are they even hold spots and what makes them good at all? So all these topics are very interesting.
I won't say who the player was, but this lecture was also somewhat inspired by a player who was really experienced and felt like that they were playing less well at a recent time than they normally do. They're like, I don't know what's going on. Like I'm just like losing more than I should. And I feel like I'm really experienced at this game. And what we did is we sat down and we went through every single hold spot on like common maps and described like, oh, like this is the breakdown of roles in this spot, and you have forgotten the keys. Like you've forgotten what can go wrong in every single spot in the game. And like I actually am a little sad that we don't have more time because I wish I could sort of go through a lot more old spots and do that kind of analysis. Maybe it's something I could do for a YouTube video. But we found that this kind of discussion of just going back to basics and understanding like why you hold in certain spots, what is the reason that spot works, and in under what conditions will that spot stop working, right? That's what contextualizes you to play, make good decisions. Because now you're not just holding a horde, you're holding a horde with purpose. You're shooting specials with purpose, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes a big difference knowing like where the special angles are for each hold spot, and knowing why even some hold spots are good and others aren't, because some like they seem very great, but then in some situations you really do not want to stand there, but maybe you just don't know. It happens to the best of them. I see one more question in the Twitch chat right here. Do you consider playing without ally outlines as practice for communication? And with all the immersive visual clutter to maximize input overload?
I think it will maybe help you in some ways and hurt you in others, because a big part of effective communication and problem solving is that you have access to as much information as possible. And player outlines give you access to information through walls, so that's inherently super valuable, right? If you think it's something that would help you, you should feel free to try it and see how you feel, because I can't really dictate what the best practice for you is. But I think I would probably lean toward like having them on, because I think you should be able to like process that information and share information even if it's a little redundant. That's my first instinct.
Yeah. I think I would actually agree. I had a couple instances as well where I was like telling my team like, does your UI work? Because they kept forgetting what is happening on their screen because they were so focused on maximizing DPS and getting to the correct position as fast as possible and all that. They just kind of forgot that, well, 3 of their teammates were gray, and so all of them had like a healing item, but no one really healed. So like complete confusion going on. So yeah, it happens. It happens.
Yeah.
All right, but without any more questions, I think we can slowly get to the end of the stream. Thanks a lot, Lonk, for this incredible detailed but also very open discussion about how information has to flow, how the basic mechanics and the good team play can enable you to accomplish basically anything, really, because the best team play can overcome most mechanically complicated situations, but not all mechanics can carry you through the most difficult situation in the game, sadly. So yeah, with those topics covered, I would just give you a brief heads up, because this weekend is going to cover the last section of this Captain series, of this Captain's event. We will have one stream on Saturday and one stream on Sunday on 6 p.m. CET. It will start. Many of the teams will be playing in this exact time frame and will be casted on the Fight the Tide Twitch channel right here. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Also, in the Onslaught series Discord, you will be notified when it's ready to go. So there will be a lot of teams playing. A lot of them have been practicing these difficulties for the last 2 weeks. And it is time to shine and show what everyone has learned. And I assume a lot of them are also here in the Twitch chat. So it's your time to shine, your moment where you can show what has happened during these 2 weeks. Yes. Oh yeah, that's the question we can quickly go in. How does the map pool work for this weekend? The map pool is quite open, but we have a small pool from which the captains can pick the maps and then create a list of maps. So it will be the usual. We have 4 maps that will be covered in 3 hours of time, and the teams try to accomplish as many wins as they can on these 4 maps during this period. Yeah, but without any more questions and without any more lectures that we have to cover, I think that is the end of the stream. Lonk, do you want to say a few more words?
No, I said many words. I think now it's time to release the rat slayers.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for your participation. Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you for these 2 weeks. This was the last Onslaught University stream that we had in this event. I hope it worked out. I hope it was fun. If you have any feedback for this concept, please let us know so we can improve it for the future. This might not be the last time. We don't know. It's all up to you. We'll see what happens. But with that done, I'll see you on the weekend for the last final 2 streams. Goodbye.